And then we have 4K cameras other manufacturers have launched. The next thing in the food chain was all the other devices to take that raw content that I have captured and actually make something usable out of it. And a lot of these companies that I've talked about, and really NAB 2013 was probably a watershed in that a lot of companies have gotten into the ability to take 4K raw files or 4K files and make content, usable content out of that. And all these companies have kind of got on board with it. The other end of the spectrum is consumer. Sony launched, LG, Samsung, I'm not sure who else at the moment, have launched 4K televisions. 55 to 80 inch are commercially available today. There are probably larger sizes coming. There are several 4K projectors, home theater projectors available at the moment. And you'll probably see more manufacturers jumping on this bandwagon. Now the next question is why do I need a 4K display in my house? First thing I'll say is go out in the lobby and look at our 4K consumer television. It's a little large, but you'll get an idea why you would want it. But in reality, what it really boils down to is 20 years ago, the average television size in the US was 19 inches. When HD came out, the average size went to somewhere around 40 to 50 inches in the average US home. Because of that, HD filled that gap very well. A 40-inch HD resolution made a 40-inch screen look good. If I took an old NTSC standard and blew it up to a 40-inch screen, it probably wouldn't look so good. It starts to fall apart. Having said that, people are more and more want larger screen TVs in their house, 60, 70, 80-inch screens. If I take an HD resolution image and blow it up to an 80-inch screen, you'll see the pixelization, especially if you're sitting in your house where you typically are 2 to 3 times the vertical height of the screen away. In other words, you're pretty close to the screen. I mean, even this is at full HD resolution. You probably, from where you're sitting, and certainly if you're probably in the front row, you begin to see the pixelization. If this was a 4K device, you would not see the pixelization. So that's one of the reasons behind 4K kind of migrating, if you will, in the consumer world. But the issue with 4K is, first of all, surprise, surprise, is cost. Cost is always an issue. If you think about it, like I said, 4K is 4 times HD resolution. So if I'm a manufacturer making a 4K panel, for instance, I'm 4 times as likely to have panel failures or panels that are made not to spec regarding pixels and yield rates will go down by that factor. So instantly my cost to develop, cost to produce goes up. The other issue is content. Got a 4K television, that's great. What am I going to put on it? I don't think the cable companies are quite ready to show 4K content yet. And how do I connect it? HDMI, how do I integrate it? There's a lot of challenges there. And I'll talk a little bit more about that as well. And then in the 4K world, there's actually kind of a third area. I talked about the digital cinema world. I talked about consumer. The third area is actually probably as fast a growing area now as either of the other two. It's typically known as visualization, simulation, big data. There's different terms for it and there's different applications. What it actually means is more and more things are done, whether it's training, product development, what have you, are done virtually, not in real time, not in real hard clay or modeling or what have you. The automotive industry probably led this development. The car companies are the first people that would, instead of building a car in clay, they would electronically build a car and look at it. Does that color look right? Does that fender shape look right? Before they actually put anything into manufacture. It saves an immense amount of time. The interesting thing is, over the past several years, a number of companies that make shampoo bottles, companies that make textile materials will develop things virtually and look at it. Does it look right? Bring in focus groups. Is that going to fly? And it expands collaborative processes by the fact that everybody can see this file and look at it and see what they think of it. Simulation is another one. Used to be simulation really meant like flight simulators, but now almost any kind of teaching can be done in simulation. 4K is nice in the fact that I can get a lot of resolution, obviously, or I can create something called near eye limiting resolution. If I want to teach you to do something, image, I want you focused on what I'm trying to train you on. And by creating something called near eye limiting resolution, in other words, I'm putting up as much information on the screen or more than the human eye or your visual acuity can resolve, it basically replicates the way the real world works. In other words, if you look at this wall, there's more detail there than you can see unless you walk right up to it. So if I virtually can do that, I can create that same environment. The other nice thing is 4K devices typically have very narrow pixel pitches. In other words, the gap between individual pixels is very small, so it makes a seamless, smooth image. And then immersion, which kind of goes along with this, is the ability to immerse you in an environment. There's a lot of research going on, Iowa State being a big one in this, that does research into what the human eye, or the human brain really, can perceive. So whether I'm creating some sort of detail on a shampoo bottle, or whether I'm creating some sort of training, or whether I'm creating some sort of virtual simulation, the fact that I have that much resolution allows me to create that environment to do that. And then this one is also, some people call it big data, the ability to look at large data sets on one screen. 4K allows you to do that relatively easily. Things like command and control walls, monitoring, analysis. Believe it or not, one of our largest customers for 4K projectors is actually an investment bank, because they look at huge Excel spreadsheets and data sets and data trends, and they do it in a collaborative environment. In other words, I need a big screen when I have 30 people standing around looking at this information, and they can't do that with lower resolutions. So all these applications are tending to drive who is using 4K, whether it's movie theaters, whether it's video files, high-end training, what have you. But what's the limit? What scares people away? First of all, and probably most importantly, is obviously the cost. And that third bullet point, complexity. The minute I start, people will come to us and we have this application and we may suggest a 4K display. The minute we say 4K display, people get the deer in the headlight look, like, oh my God, I have no idea how to do this. And to be honest, there are some challenges involved, and I'll go through some of the challenges. Some good news, bad news. The good news is I think a lot of the challenges are starting to go away, but so some of the challenges, one of which I talked about, is content, but content is rapidly increasing. More and more movies, from the consumer point of view of watching 4K in my house, if you will, more and more movies, more and more episodic televisions are shot in 4K, which means these files are readily available. I do know that there are testing going on with some of the major networks, especially some of the major sports networks, to acquire and shoot stuff in 4K, which means there'll be more things to watch in 4K. And then graphic content is obviously rapidly increasing, and the ability to deliver it. Some of the issues, however, is how do I actually connect a 4K signal? Like I said, 4K is 4 times HD. 3G, HD, SDI 3G is roughly 3.2 gigabits per second. So if I'm doing 4K, that means I'm over 12 gigabits per second. So think about that for a second. I'm moving a lot of data. HDMI is typically used in the consumer market. HDMI 1.4a was actually the first HDMI version that could display 4K, but it can only do it at 24 frames and at 420 color bit depth. So 24 frames at 420 color bit depth is probably okay if you're watching a movie. It's probably not okay if you're doing some real precise viewing, if you will. The other question is, how do I switch it? How do I switch a signal that large? Another way to get around it is DisplayPort. If you have an Apple or a Mac device, you may be familiar with DisplayPort or DisplayPort Mini, if you will. That can do it. DisplayPort, the nice thing about that is if I use dual outputs, I can actually run a 444 color bit depth at 60p. So I can do a full res signal. Our brethren at NVIDIA actually now has a card, AMD does well, that will actually put it out. I can put it in a reasonably good tower PC, and I can actually spit out full 4K, full resolution. Quad HD SDI is the other one. This is typically what's done in video production facilities. It's not the most inexpensive interface. In some cases may not be practical simply by the amount of cabling and so forth needed. And then DVI as well can do it. So in other words, if I have an application, maybe it's video centric, maybe it's simulation centric, these are the flavors or the ways you can get 4K to the device. They all have their pluses and minuses, but they all will work. And it depends on what you want to do and what you're trying to do. Like I said, there are challenges with this, but this is another thing that's kind of driving this. From the training and simulation point of view, the people that I'm typically training now are the kids that grew up playing Xbox or PlayStation 3s. So they are used to very, very good, precise graphics. So if I go back to a plain old 2K resolution graphic, I'm not going to hold their attention. Another thing that has developed over the past 10 years is most people now in school and who recently graduated are what's known as visual learners. In other words, these kids grew up watching projectors in classrooms. I'm going to date myself, but we used to use blackboards and overhead projectors when I went to school, and those days are gone. Kids now learn visually, not necessarily just written and orally. So 4K offers the ability to reach, to excite, to teach this new generation. One of the other things that's kind of driving this, and it's something that's probably going to be the biggest effect, and what we internally call the consumer effect. What this means is this. Right up until now, if I was going to do something with 4K, it's not easy to do, and it's very expensive to do. Today, there are consumer manufacturers making 4K devices. If you think about when we went from standard def to HD, the minute HD devices started becoming prevalent in the home, the cost of HD devices, and not just the display and not just the camera, but whether it's a Blu-ray player or whether it's devices to route HD, came down significantly. And the reason is this, and I'm sure the other manufacturers do it, I know Sony does it. The chipsets that we develop, let's say for a 4K consumer television, actually are the same chipsets we use in a 4K projector, or maybe it's a 4K camera. And because we develop those chipsets for mass market, and sell, hopefully, knock on wood, a lot of them, their cost per unit comes way down. So what that means is you have this kind of a snowballing effect. Price comes down, sell more, price comes down, sell more. And it kind of feeds on itself. And you can see that with another great example is flat panel. I think the first plasma we made that was like 42 inches, and it was 720 resolution, was $11,000. And, you know, a 40-inch television now is, at Costco's what, like $400, $500. So it gives you an idea of that's what the consumer effect really means. So again, it drives this core technology. And before I go through this, there's one thing I actually forgot to mention about visualization, and it just kind of dawned on me. One of the other big markets actually is medical. That's driving 4K. More and more medical teaching is done visually. In other words, years ago, if there was a surgeon was teaching interns or residents a particular surgical procedure, they would do it with the surgeon doing it and the resident standing around watching them, or watching from some sort of viewing hall, if you will, or window. That's done electronically now. And the fact that 4K cameras are available and 4K displays are available, that gives the resolution to teach the residents precisely and show them precisely the surgical techniques or the medical techniques. But sidebar there. But that actually is one of the things that's driving the simulation market as well. So back to the consumer effect. This gives you an idea, and these numbers and these models are Sony models. So I'm not that up to speed on what our competition's doing on the television side. In 2011, we launched a version of that 84-inch. It's out in the, I guess you call that the lobby of the foyer. That was $20,000. This year, we launched a 55 and a 65-inch. That is, in the case of the 55, is $6,000, and that's in 2 years. It gives you an idea of the way things can change. As well, on the consumer side, in 2010, a 4K projector that was 5,500 lumens is $100,000. Now, mind you, this is an industrial model. It's got some design sets and features that you probably would never use in your house. But we launched a 2,000 lumen version, $21,000 at CEDIA a year ago, and this past CEDIA we launched one that is, I think it's about $10,000, just under $10,000, 2,000 lumens. The other thing that will drive this is probably besides the actual cost of the imagers or the cost of the devices, is and how do I connect this? Well, if there are now a market for projectors in televisions in people's houses, then there'll be a market for servers and a market for gaming devices. So the next thing you'll start to see is actually servers and gaming devices come out that can play 4K content. Theoretically, the PlayStation format can do it. It's not quite there yet, but theoretically can do it. Feeding that 4K display out in the lobby is actually a server that we produce. It's a little black box, and basically use a Blu-ray player remote control with it. And it puts out HDMI and plays out 4K. We Sony have launched a subscription service. So if you buy one of our displays, you can sign up and they will stream to you periodically. It's almost like a version of Netflix, if you will, 4K movies. So now there are actually ways to get content into the device. The other effect is, I like to use this term about, I have it in my living room, I want it in my boardroom. One of the easiest way to think about this is when flat panels came out, in the consumer world, they were all 16 by 9. But there used to be 4 by 3 flat panels that were used in the corporate world, in meeting rooms and classrooms. And back then, all projectors were 4 by 3, mainly because most laptops were 4 by 3. My PowerPoint presentation, or the resolution of what I was presenting on it, was 4 by 3. Literally within 18 months of 16 by 9 flat panels coming into the consumer market, we saw the need or the demand for 4 by 3 flat panels literally fall off a cliff. And there's some speculation, you get different opinions of it. My personal opinion is people have a certain item in their house. You know, the CEO, the chief technology officer, whoever is the guy that's making the big decisions about technology deployment in their institutions. If I have something better, something in my house, I want at least the same thing in my corporate boardroom. And that's when we saw that take off. Hence, now that you'll start to see 4K display devices in somebody's living room, you're going to see that demand going forward. We're already starting to see it. The first places we're starting to see it actually is universities, especially film school universities. In other words, if people are playing 4K in their house, our film school students should be watching 4K images in either the lecture hall or the large theater. So we're already starting to see that. The other nice thing about it is more consumer devices mean more content means more displays. So in other words, it's another kind of one of these snowball effects. What happens is I got to feed all these consumer devices, which means I have to produce more content. If I have more content, I'm going to produce more displays, which means the cost of the displays goes down. So again, kind of one of those snowball effects. Real quick, I'm just going to talk a little bit about some of our offerings on the display side. And then actually, after that, I'll take a few questions. We make a consumer projector. This is the one that was $20,000. Be happy to sell it to you if you want one. It is a little bit expensive for what it is. We launched a new one. One thing I will note is this technology to take 2K up to 4K, that's one of those chipsets I talked about. In other words, we've developed chipsets that we now can put in consumer product. When we first developed this chipset, that was what went in the $100,000 projector. But because we're producing more, we can make it less expensive. And then some of the optional features and so forth. These are the direct view televisions I talked about. One note here, you'll see this term. That term is 4 times HD instead of true 4K. 4K is 4096 by 2160. Ultra HD is 1920. Yeah, 3840 by 2160. So the reason this technology this is probably a trivia more than anything else. From a manufacturing point of view, making LCD panels that are 4 times HD resolution is easier than making 4 times 2K resolution, because the dies and the mechanics to make the panels were set for HD, so it was easier to scale up 4 times HD. That's the reason that's around, by the way. If you can really see the difference, I'm not so sure, but whatever. And again, the newer models that we came out with, they are Ultra HD. We've also now produced a 4K monitor for production applications. When we first came out with a 4K camera for production, for acquisition, after how much does it cost, the next question is okay, what do I look at it on? How do I actually look at the content? So this is, again, kind of that spiraling up, if you will, of 4K. But this is a production monitor. It's a 4K production monitor. It has basically every type of input you could think of to get 4K into it. It also has an option, skip one page. It also has an option for a playback file server on the back of it. Literally sticks on the back of it so I can plug content into it and play it. Then on the opposite side of the spectrum, 4K cameras. One of the advantages to shooting in 4K, obviously besides resolution, is it's very easy to go back and forth between 2K and 4K. I always have plenty of pixels to do it with. The other interesting thing that's kind of come up, and some of the sports networks are looking at this, is if I have a 4K imager, 4K camera, or even higher resolution, I can electronically zoom down to get whether it's the look of the quarterback's face or what have you. So in other words, I don't have to optically zoom in and out as much. I electrically can do it and still have the resolution to do it. Or I can zoom down on that image. So the intriguing thing about that is, if you think about it, I watch football, but somebody explained this to me. Typically, if you have the sideline shot in a football game, and I want to see the quarterback and the quarterback's audibling. The next thing to do is they'll cut to the defense to see the defense move, or I'll pull back out to see the whole field. With 4K resolution, I have that much palette. I can then electronically zoom, if you want to call it that, and have the quarterback and the defense in the same shot, but yet it appears to be a tight shot. That's the beauty of having that much resolution. Other devices that we make, this is primarily a simulation projector. Has things like very, very fine pixel structure. If you've never seen a 4K projector, I strongly recommend going to an AMC or Regal, and without bothering anybody, walk up to the screen. Literally walk up to the face of the screen. I say that because you cannot see the pixels. You literally cannot see the pixels. So for simulation, that's what I want to do. And this is the model for that. If you have customers or you have applications where someone needs to do some sort of training or simulation, this projector is designed for that. 20,000 to 1 native contrast, which means it has very, very good blacks. It also has an incredibly wide color space. And then, of course, we make bigger units that go all the way up to 20,000 lumens for whatever applications you need. So with that, that's my little spiel. So questions regarding 4K? So I did that good. Just took me to watch. No questions. Yes?
Are you making any projectors 4K that are laser?
Let me back up and say this is a laser projector that I'm using right now. It's an LCD based. I also say that Sony stands for soon only not yet. I don't know if you've ever heard that or not, but I'll preface this by saying the laser development for Sony, and I'm not going to speak to other manufacturers, for Sony, is really two channels or two tracks. There's this type of system, which is blue laser and phosphor. And this particular projector is 4,000 lumens, probably can make it a little bit brighter. For 4K, you probably will see a small format projector built with that technology. The opposite side is the big projectors, like in theaters, the 10, 15, 20,000 lumen. Frankly speaking, this technology probably will not be able to do that. The flip side of that is what people typically call RGB laser systems. It's a true red, green, blue. Someday you will see it. We have shown one on a 10,000 lumen, no, that was the 20,000 lumen projector. We showed it at SEMTI before NAB 2012, and it looked pretty good. The problem is the laser light engine was about twice the size of this podium, and it cost $100,000, and then you get to buy the projector. So, will you eventually see it? Yes, but you won't see it tomorrow. I mean, we could build it, but no one could. It's not practical at this point. The technology is getting there, but not quite there. Any other questions? I guess not. Well, thank you very much for your time.